Back when I was in high school, at the end of our school year, we would have a bonfire. And on that bonfire, we would throw our old notes or any unneeded and unnecessary papers we had left over from our school year. And it was the best. It was so cathartic throwing those old chemistry papers into the fire and watching them burn. And honestly, something that we should add to that bonfire is our math textbooks. The majority, if not all, textbooks are not made with our students in mind. And in today's episode, I'm going to be sharing how we can revamp our curriculum and our textbooks to truly meet students where they're at and hook them in so they can deeply understand and love math. Let's get started.
Welcome to Solving for the Undefined podcast. I'm your host, Johanna, founder of Miss Kuiper's Classroom, the place that equips teachers in creating a healthy math classroom where students can thrive, no matter their academic abilities. But it's not always about the numbers, and that's why I'm here, bringing you the formulas to solve your problems, math and otherwise, plus strategies on cultivating that necessary math mindset. And that's what you can count on.
Hello. Welcome to a brand new episode of Solving for the Undefined podcast. I'm your host, Johanna, and today's episode is going to be a hot take on our curriculums that we see today and how we can improve them and make them better for our students in the classroom. And to start us off, I just want to be clear that I think textbooks in and of themselves are not made for students in mind. Whether it is a workbook style textbook or a book that just has problems in it and students write their work on papers. Either style of textbook are not made for students. That is not to say that the material within those textbooks or within our curriculum is terrible, because I think there are some valuable and really good in-depth problems within our curriculum. But it's the way the textbook is structured that is the problem and what I'm going to be focusing on today in today's episode. So, buckle up and let's get started. So a little while ago, probably 3 weeks ago, I attended a math conference and Peter Liljedahl was one of the main speakers. And in his presentation, he shared a lot of the new research that he has done and kind of the supplements to the Building Thinking Classrooms book. In this study, he did research for 3 months on the problems within a classroom. And what he and the teachers did together was they took the problems from their textbook, from their curriculum, printed them out on paper, and chopped them up into single strips of paper. And so that means that there was one problem on each piece of paper. And they gave the students problems that way for 3 months, and students thrived. They were able to go through the problems, apply those critical thinking skills, and solve complicated and complex math problems. Then, to kind of give the flip side, they decided after those 3 months, they were going to give students a problem with the textbook. So they told students, on page 86, I want you to complete problems number 1. And students freaked out. It went from them being able to solve these crazy, awesome problems to being so nervous and scared of, I don't know how to do this. You haven't taught us this. What is this? And he summarized it as students have preconceived notions about what textbooks are and what they mean psychologically to them. So just taking the problems out of the textbook is one of the best ways to get the most out of what you have in your classroom. And that point right there is what I'm going to be bringing back everything that I talk about in today's episode. We are taking things out of the textbook and using it within our classroom to strengthen our students' math minds. So, first thing that we can do to strengthen our curriculum is taking those problems and putting them into slides. Now, one thing that my curriculum does fairly decently is it starts off with a really good conceptual problem, and it helps students discover an aspect of the math. I take that out of the textbook, I put it into slides, and have students do one problem at a time with their team. This gives them the visual on the screen and allows them to refer back to it without having the entire textbook in front of them. Because I know that when I've done textbooks like that, even though it's a workbook style, they are not doing the same amount of work as if I just gave them that one discovery problem. And another thing that I've done with our introduction lesson to a new unit is what I call clue-based lessons or discovery-based lessons using clues. And what I do is I will take a problem, I will chop it up into its segments and put them as clues around the room. And because I do groups of 3, I have a clue A, a clue B, and clue C. And I'll have the overarching problem or the foundation of it on the screen. And then I have students go to either clue A, B, or C, bring that information back to their team, and then have them solve it. Because this is giving them movement, it's giving them critical thinking skills, and it's giving them a role or a purpose within the activity itself. And that's the first strategy, taking our textbook problems, our introduction lessons, and putting them into slides so students are textbook free with our introduction lessons. Now, moving into the practice portion of our textbooks, I think this is the place where we have the most room to make it different and make it more engaging. So one of the number one ways that I take my textbook problems is I make them into thin sliced problems. I briefly mentioned thin sliced problems back in episode 43 when I talked about my predictions for this school year or this year in general. And what thin sliced problems are is the very first problem is something that all groups or students can do. It's like the very basic problem of whatever you're doing. And then the problem that's next is one step up. And it's typically described as n plus 1, n plus 2, n plus 3. So you can kind of see that sequential order of their progressively getting more challenging. And to accompany the thin slice problems, the way I do it is I have students working on their vertical whiteboards. Now, I have an amazing classroom where I have whiteboards on 3 of my 4 walls, and only because the other one is windows. And I have students in their groups of 3 go to their team's whiteboards, work on problem number 1, and then move on to problem number 2. And I usually have buckets of those problems where it says 1, 2, 3, and 4. And that's how I have students continue on in their problems. And what's great about thin slice problems is the majority of the problems that I use for my students are taken directly from my textbook. So when I go to create thin slice problems for our whiteboard activities, I'm looking through the lesson that my students are working on. So say it was systems of equations. My textbook has a really cool progression that it walks students through. And I will just take that and chop it up into pieces. But for my linear equation unit, it did not stack problems in such a way that it got more challenging. It was kind of all over the place. So what I did for those, instead of just printing out or copying my textbook pages, I took the snipping tool that's on our computers or capture tool, and I just screenshotted those problems, put them on paper in the order I wanted them, labeled them 1, 2, 3, and 4, printed those out, cut them out, and put them in buckets. And it was as simple as that. All I had to do, it probably took me 15, 20 minutes to do that, looking through my textbook, finding the problems, printing them out, cutting it up, and putting it in buckets. And just like that, I have an activity that's going to last half the class period where students are going to be actively engaged in the lesson because they're only focusing on one problem at a time and they're not overwhelmed with the amount of words or problems on a page. Now, if you have a tight print budget or this is not something you want to do yet, one thing that I have done is I make these thin slice problems into slideshows rather than pieces of paper that I cut up. And the way I did this was, it actually came to me because I was sick with COVID for a week and I wasn't able to get into my classroom to print these problems for my students last year. And so I decided I'd create a slideshow for them. And one of the most amazing things is you can send them a presentation link where they can't view the slides, they can only view the presentation. So they can't necessarily look ahead the way they could if you just gave them the slide show. A really cool feature. It works for Google Slides and for PowerPoint. Pro tip right there. So what I did was I had the problem on the first slide, and then I had the basic answer on the second one. And I know that can sound kind of strange because students will have the answer, so why would they do the work? If you are in a classroom where you truly emphasize students doing the work over getting an answer, this is not going to be a problem. Plus, it's not a full worked out answer. It's just the bare bones answer. So, for example, kind of going back to the idea of systems of equations, if the problem was there are 2 trees when they're planted, one of them is a seed in the ground that grows 1.5 feet every year. The other one is 3 feet tall when it's planted and it grows 1 foot every year. When are they going to be the same height? And then your answer would be 12 and 6. They don't know what those answers mean outside of context, so they're actually going to have to complete the problem to see what those numbers mean in context to the height or the year, whatever it is. Plus, doing it this way when you have the answers, like you give students the answers, it's going to give them that self-checking that is going to create independence and not reliance on you of answering the questions of, is this right? Did I do this right? Is this correct? It eliminates those kind of clerical questions and helps students focus on, oh, we didn't get that answer. I'm not sure how we could do that. All right, now I'll raise my hand to ask. It's going to help diminish the amount of questions that you have to sift through as a teacher doing one of these types of lessons. Another way to kind of take problems out of your textbook and use them with students one at a time is playing a game. Now, some of my favorite games to play with this style of activity is Jeopardy, Grudge Ball, or Trash Ball, and the Unfair Game, which if you go back and listen to episode 46 or 47, I'm not recalling the number right now, you will be able to listen to the full episode on how to play the Unfair Game, what prizes you can do, and how to make it more productive for your students. And for those games, I just again make slideshows with a problem on the screen and a timer. And with Jeopardy, there's tons of templates you can find online if you type in like Jeopardy PowerPoint template or Jeopardy Google Slides template. Things will pop up that you can easily use. You don't have to create your own. And those are some things that you can just put or screenshot your textbook problems, pop it in there, and make your lesson a little bit more exciting and engaging. And when you do these, this doesn't have to be a long full class period thing. It can just be a 20 minutes or 15-minute practice time, whatever you have time for. Like I've played the Unfair Game with maybe 15 minutes and I have like 3 prizes. We're still having fun. Students are still engaged with the problems and we're only taking up whatever time we would have for our practice. So to kind of summarize our episode today, the number one takeaway I want you to have is take the problems out of the textbook. That is going to be the best way to get your students engaged and critically thinking because it's going to limit the overwhelm of seeing so many problems on a page or, wow, that's a lot of problems in an entire textbook, or even from them moving ahead and not sticking with you where you're at. Take problems one step at a time, literally, and it's going to change your classroom dramatically and help your curriculum feel more engaging than it was previously. All right, if you've made it this far in today's episode, I have a special surprise for you. On Thursday, March 23rd, I am announcing a brand new course that I am super excited about called Molding Mathematicians. And this is my beta launch, meaning I'm only going to be taking 20 new members into this course. I created this course with you in mind because I want to help you engage your students academically in a way that helps them deeply understand and love math. I know how hard it can be to have students in your classroom who give up before they even try a problem. And I know this year has been filled with student apathy, and we're tired of the lack of effort that students give. And I know that it's hard to figure out what to change, and it can be overwhelming by having to change anything. So I want you to think about it this way. If you want things to change dramatically, dramatic change has to occur, and you are the catalyst of that change. If you are ready to make that change, I want you to come check out my Instagram on March 23rd, because I'm going to be sharing all the details about this course, Molding Mathematicians, and how it can transform your classroom into a place where students are deeply understanding and loving math, all because of you. And with that, I'll calculator.
Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. To find all the links and resources to things talked about in this episode, head on over to MissKuipersClassroom.com and click on podcast.